Ladies and gentlemen, our next honoree is a person who has had a glorious career at WHIO Radio, but died way too soon. Throughout his career, he was very active in a number of community events and parades. Ladies and gentlemen, a pioneer in the field, Mr. Winston Hoehner.
The Miami Valley's weather, traffic, and news authority. 1290 WHIO Dayton, Springfield. Depend on it.
Starting all over again in Dayton.
And holding off on well-field protection.
Good morning, I'm Winston Hoehner.
And I'm Barbara Compton. This is 1290 WHIO News.
Efforts to achieve racial parity in Dayton's police department have collapsed.
Winston Hoehner had a 25-year career at WHIO Radio. Winston was born in Mandan, North Dakota on March 8, 1927. He came to WHIO on December 30th, 1964 from WONE Radio. He was one of 3 announcers who found jobs at WHIO that year after being let go by WONE. The others were Ed Kraling and Dick Beezer. After a stint as an announcer at WHIO FM, Winston took over the afternoon drive air shift on WHIO AM, a position he held for several years.
Winston Hoehner is, for better or for worse, why I'm in Dayton, Ohio. When I stopped at WONE, they actually had Winston, he was on the air at that time and program director, come down to see me. He took the tape, he said, I've got a record on, I've got to go. I heard nothing else. That was September. I heard again from Winston in about January, and he called out of a clear blue sky and said, if you're still interested, I'd like to talk to you. Well, that's unheard of in radio, certainly in those days, and I was delighted. I came down here and talked to Winston. I had sent him an air check prior to that. Talked to Winston, and I thought, this is a wonderful city. It's a great station playing the kind of music that I really like to listen to, and Winston was such a gentleman, such a really, really nice man.
After a stint as an announcer at WHIO FM, Winston took over the afternoon drive air shift on WHIO AM, a position he held for several years.
Winston was the old school for news, and if you were looking at the classic newscaster, especially on radio, the delivery was that of the old radio newscaster. Not quite like the ones now. He was back in the days when the voice was everything, and if you didn't have a deep voice, you weren't on radio. And if you didn't have the delivery like Winston had, you weren't on radio. So it was sort of neat to work with a guy like that, because I had grown up. My voice isn't all bad, but it's depending on what I'm doing is how it comes out. But I always thought of him as the consummate newscaster, because that's what he did. It was very stable, and yet this is what you heard on the air, and yet there was a sense of humor there that not everybody knew, because not all of it ended up on the air.
Winston Hoehner gave me my big break in the Dayton market. So I'm forever indebted to him, because I was hovering around in Springfield and Middletown, and I always wanted to be a radio news reporter. And I would hound him about getting a job with WHIO News, because it was the premier radio news room in the whole area. And I always wanted to work there, and I wanted to work for the legendary Winston Hoehner. But we always had such a good time, and we always took news very seriously. And it was just a real honor and a pleasure to work for him.
Longtime WHIO radio morning show host, the late Lou Am, said of Winston, his proudest accomplishment was an interview with Iranian students who held 60 American hostages in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in November 1979. Part of those interviews were broadcast.
Yeah, it was kind of tough, and you had to be versatile, and I'll tell you, Winston was a very versatile talent, as you know, to be in the business, and he could do anything.
He would do the news in the mornings and go home around noontime, and Wayne would come in and do radio news in the afternoon. But Winston was, I really think he was the true pioneer as far as radio news goes for WHIO.
Winston was an active member of the charter commission that formed the city of Bellbrook, and past president of the Lutheran Social Services and the Zion Lutheran Church. He was also active in his community.
Winston was a journalist with a conscience, and that came about because of the kind of person that he was. He was a very kind person, cared about all of us as employees, not only at work, but, you know, how our personal lives might be being impacted too. And the story that I have to tell about that is that I was scheduled to start to work at WHIO Radio on a Monday, had been in to observe on a Friday afternoon. My father was taken to the hospital with chest pains that night, released early Saturday morning. I went on into work then, and then my father wound up having a massive heart attack, dying early Monday morning. And I called Winston at 4 a.m. the day I'm supposed to go to work, and I said, my father died, Winston. And he was very nice and very kind, and said, don't worry about it, Rick. He said, start when you can. And I think we had the funeral service in the middle of the week, and I reported for work on Friday of that week. He brought a book into me that he thought would be helpful, and it was. And just generally helped me through what was a very tough time, certainly unexpected in my life.
Winston died a week after fellow WHIO employees helped him celebrate his quarter-century mark at the station. In his name, his wife Jan established the Winston Hoehner Scholarship Fund, which has dispersed to date over $10,000 to 11 Bellbrook High School students who intend to major in journalism or English at accredited colleges or universities. Winston is a legend in Dayton broadcasting, and the Dayton Area Broadcasters Hall of Fame is pleased to induct Winston Hoehner posthumously into its 2007 class.
My boss, he was the one who hired me at WHIO Radio, and like Wince, I came from WONE, so it's not all bad making that transition. Skip Hafner, who was the news director at TV for quite a number of years, called him the consummate professional. And working with Winston side by side for a number of years, I learned his secret formula. I'm going to pass it along to you tonight. Never cut corners. Be thorough. Be fair. Never be afraid to track down a story that needs to be told. That was Winston Hoehner. Now I want to have Brian, his son, come up and accept the award.
Mine is a little briefer than Kim's. I also would like to offer congratulations to the other honorees. My dad would have been proud to be in this group. You all deserve it. It would have been a big thrill for him. My dad would have been 80 by now, so he'd have been older than most of you people here. And those of you that knew him, and for those that didn't, I thought I'd just kind of remind you that he was accomplished, he was bold, he was consistent and dedicated, he was ethical, he was forthright, genuine, honest, incisive, just, kind, loyal, magnanimous, noble, objective and principled, a quintessential professional, a role model. He was selfless. He was trustworthy. He was unassuming. He was versatile and warm-hearted. At times he did yeoman's work, and he had a real zeal for life. From A to Z, he was quite a person. Few knew that he was really active in his community. Some mentioned on the tape that he was president of Lutheran Social Service. He also served on the Charter Commission that took Bellbrook from a tiny village to a city. He later served on the zoning commission, the first zoning commission that the city had. He served in numerous civic events, numerous parades. When anybody asked, he was glad to do it, not only in Bellbrook, but around the city of Dayton. He was also a religious man, and he served in leadership roles in his church and sang in the choir. He was not Frank Sinatra, but he thought he was. In his spare time, he was an accomplished woodworker and an avid reader. But most of all, he was a wonderful husband, a terrific father, an adorable grandfather, and a really good neighbor. He wasn't perfect, though. He was a Michigan fan. He would have been embarrassed. I would like to thank the Board of Directors and the whole Broadcast Hall of Fame Committee. He would have been deeply humbled. and very appreciative of this award. On behalf of my mother and my family, I'm honored and proud to accept it for him. Thank you.